a relationship, instead of thinking of it as an equal partnership, think of it as an interdependent system of fairness, right? It's literally you just look in your body, right? The bodies that we exist in is an interdependent system, right? The heart is beating. We got our kidneys, we got all these muscular system, nervous system, circulatory system. We have all these organs that are positioned and do their job, right? Do their job, thankfully, to keep us well and alive and being able to do the things that we have to do. But the heart never gets any rest, though. The heart has to continue beating, 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 prayerfully, all the way up until, right, you've done all that you needed to do here. It doesn't get a rest, and oftentimes I'll say to my clients, especially if they have, when they're in the midst of an argument and they're saying, they're complaining about their partner, saying their partner is not doing, this or that or enough or et cetera, right? And I'll say, well, imagine if your heart, said like, man, I just got to keep beating all the time, like the kidney better pull its weight, or the tonsils or whatever other areas in our body that clearly, right, is not doing what it does. But it doesn't do that, right? It does what it knows it is designed and purposed to do, because it knows that it has to continue doing that to be able for us to, right, live life healthily. And I think it's a great way to kind of look at the structure of our relationships, because, yeah, the heart is there and it's beating all the time, but the heart without the brain, right, it's not going to be great for our body. And each part, right, of our body, the internal mechanism, is valuable, but none of it is valuable detached from the fact that it is the purpose of the whole, right? The whole dynamics of the way our body works is that it is there to help to support our life, to be able to, right, sustain the life of an individual. It's that one purpose and harmony in that one vision. And I think in that same way, that's how we look at our relationships, right? Is that there is this interdependent system between a husband and a wife, between a man and a woman, that, we're not doing the same things because we're not the same, and we have to complement each other. And we know that as we move along and walk with each other, right, there is a collective purpose or a collective vision that is greater than what we can do individually.
You'll be my forever friend, this love will never end. Oh, nothing can come between us.
The quote that I presented at the beginning of the podcast is, can you have two things or two people that are equally necessary but not equally valuable? Can you have two things that are equally necessary but not equally valuable? Meaning like they do not have the same value, right? So that's the quote. And the question that I asked was that, just imagine that someone is allowing you to build your most ideal relationship, and they present to you this question. In this relationship, you can create either an environment of an equal partnership or an interdependent system of fairness. Which one would you choose? So that was the quote, and that is the question. So think about it, and I would love for you to think about it and kind of think about it in this way. What is the difference between something being equal versus something being fair? And if you have, for those of you who have come to the podcast before in the show, you, I'm sure by now, have learned that I like to ask questions that make you reflect, that make you think in depth about certain relationship topics and issues and concepts. And I also love to look at the details, pay attention to the details, and look at the nuances between, especially between words and how we use those words, and try to kind of like identify the difference in it. Because sometimes when we use these words and when we say certain statements, they just become so blurred because we don't pay attention to the details oftentimes, and we just kind of put them together, right? We just kind of put them in the same group, and they're not necessarily. So when you're thinking about it, I would love for you to think about it in that way. But while I'm waiting for you guys, as per usual, to write, and I know sometimes it takes a while to type. And of course, if you're listening to the replay, feel free to flood my feed and also answer the question and give me your feedback and your thoughts on the things that I've presented so far. But I'll chime in on it and let you know what my thoughts are. And then, of course, whenever your feedback and your statements come in, I'll read it. So for the first quote, I do agree with that quote. I do think that you can have two things that are equally necessary, but not equally valuable. And I'll tie it into the second question that I presented to you about the equal partnership versus an interdependent system of fairness. And I think that those two things kind of tie in together, because I have said before on the show and on my podcast, and I say it all the time when I'm coaching my clients, that, you know, in a relationship, the beauty of having a relationship is that you have two people who complement each other. And when you complement someone, when something is complementary, right, to you, it means that it's not exactly the same, right? That there are certain skills and there are certain things that you will have that I don't have, right? Maybe my weaknesses are your strengths, and that's how we come together and we grow. So I always say in when I coach my clients that in a relationship, you want an interdependent system of fairness instead of necessarily going into it looking at it from an equal partnership. Because I found, and most definitely if you talk to any couple that have been in a relationship for a long time, you know, they will tell you that there are many different phases in the relationship where it's not 50-50. It's not where every step of the way in each stage of the relationship that each person is giving a certain amount of percentage in the relationship that is always equal. It's just not, you know. But if it's not equal, it should always be fair, though. It should always be fair. I agree with the quote. I think you can definitely apply it in your relationship because I think when there are moments in a relationship where it just kind of naturally happens, where one person might be given 80%, because of the season that they're in. It might just be because that person has certain skill sets or has a certain characteristics or personality that can, right, take the forefront and be able to navigate that season of the relationship maybe more strongly than the other, right? It's not that both of them are lazy or anything like that. It just is dependent on what is going on. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's just take a simple example of a couple having a baby, right? A couple having a baby, right? We know it takes a heterosexual relationship to do that. Even if you're in another type of dynamic, you're going to need the sperm from a man and, you know, the egg from the woman. But let's just say it's a heterosexual relationship, right? And the man is going to, right, do his bidding and be able to be intimate with that woman. And then she, right, gets pregnant and her life, right, is altered in a totally different way from that man. She has to allow that baby, right? If they're both married and they wanted to have this child, that baby has to develop inside of her body. Hopefully, prayerfully for the full term, 9 months. Her heart literally shifts. Other organs in her body make room for this baby to develop, right? She can't eat certain foods. She can't do certain things just to make sure that her health is on par, as well as not doing things for the baby to be harmed. And then, right, when it's time to give birth to the baby, she is most definitely, right, the quarterback of that situation, of having to listen to her body, having to be able to withstand whatever, if there is pain that comes, because I've heard that some people don't. I wish I would have gotten that. Some women don't even experience pain when they have contractions. I don't know. I haven't spoken to one in real life, but I've read articles on it. I wish I would have gotten that. But anyway, nonetheless, right, giving birth, her husband is most definitely a supporting aid, but it's her, right, having to stay in tune with her body, having to go through whatever contractions and things like that to be able to give birth to that baby. And it is her that in that moment is sacrificing her life to bring that child into the world, right? So there is no equal playing field on that, right? We can say maybe that's a situation where it's 80% pretty much as far as the whole transformation, that it's going to happen more so to the woman than the man. So that's just a simple example of where that occurs. And let's maybe take another example in the, let's say, the courting or the dating phase. Normatively, right? Of course, there's outliers in any situation, but normatively, usually it is the men who pursue, right? The women, they are expected a lot heavily to date the woman, to court her. You know, a lot of times when you're going on the date, most of them are expected to pay. If he then feels like he would like to elevate the relationship and marry her, a lot of customs are that man is going to come to the family and ask, right, for her hand in marriage and things like that. And, right, so all throughout that process, we can say that he's probably putting in, right, the 80% when it comes to just talking about the process of courting and things like that. So there are many different examples that we can use where it's not equal, right, in the way of, I guess, how the relationship is functioning. But at all stages, it should be fair, right? And when we talk about fair, something being fair, that's different from equal. When something's fair, it means that it's just. It means that there is no discriminatory disadvantages that are put in play to prohibit that person from actually, right, being in the position that they're supposed to be in and being able to do and serve from the position that they're in at 100%, right? So that's a great example or a great environment for a relationship to have, because it means that those two people in the relationship are not going to do things to each other or do things in the relationship that's going to prohibit both of them to not be able to serve at 100% of their capacity in whatever season that they're in, right? So you might be like, well, Charlie, you just said 80 and the other person's giving 80 and the other person's doing 20%. That 20%, they still need to go at 100% capacity, right? So for example, I have clients that sometimes, as we're working on, the area of relationship, of course, we kind of go into the rest of their life, because it's very hard not to dive into the other areas, because our relationships are so tied into everything that we do, because we first have to start with our relationship with ourselves and God, and our relationship with ourselves before we show up in any other position that God has put us in. So oftentimes I'll start with their health, right? And we'll start to do things that pour back into them and create discipline and things like that. So let's, for example, just take a client that maybe I've had that they're not used to working out, right? They're not used to working out, but that's something that we set because this body is the vehicle that we have that we navigate through this life with. And if we don't keep this vehicle healthy, then, well, everything else kind of, right, falters or fails because your health is your greatest wealth here. So let's just say, because I know that this client is not used to exercise, I'm not going to have her do a whole hour of exercise, with 25-pound weights. I'm going to help him or her build slowly, right, their stamina and their discipline and their endurance. And I'll say, okay, 15. We're going to start with 15 minutes. Let's just work out 15 minutes, maybe 3 days a week. But for that 15 minutes, I want you to give me 100%. Right? I want you to give me your all, whatever that is. And maybe that 100% is them huffing and puffing every second and stopping and getting water because they're just not used to it, but they're still giving their 100%, right? So in that same example, when there is a season, a relationship where one person is giving 80 because just of the situation and the circumstance and because the way that they're built, they can handle a lot of the weight of what's going on right now. Not that it will always be like that, but they can. So they do. That 20% that the person is offering, right? They're doing their 20%, but they're doing that 20% while still giving their all, while still giving 100% to whatever that 20% of service that they have to give. So hopefully that clarifies it for you guys. And I know even in my mind, because sometimes when I introduce some of the concepts and when I start to try to dive into looking at the nuances between words that are oftentimes very used interchangeably, sometimes it might take a little while to kind of like look at it from those perspectives or viewpoints. So those are some of the examples of where you can kind of find why sometimes in relationships you'll have seasons where, right, it's not necessarily going to be an equal partnership. Doesn't mean that those people don't love each other. Doesn't mean that it does not mean that the 20% that is given is not valued, right? Is not valued, even in the situation of like, of course, the woman giving birth, right? She can't even hold the child or the child be developed until, right, that seed has been sown by the man. However, in the process, a lot of the process of how a child develops, right, is going to be experienced in her body, not his, right? And his support is great, but she is most definitely taking on a lot of, right, that responsibility just because of the way she is naturally built. So I kind of want you to think about it in that way. And I also use another example that I think, I know it's very helpful for me. I use it with my clients just to kind of help them understand what I mean when I say a relationship. Instead of thinking of it as an equal partnership, think of it as an interdependent system of fairness, right? It's literally you just look in your body, right? The bodies that we exist in is an interdependent system, right? The heart is beating. We got our kidneys, we got all these muscular system, nervous system, circulatory system. We have all these organs that are positioned and do their job, right? Do their job, thankfully, to keep us well and alive and being able to do the things that we have to do. But the heart never gets any rest, though. The heart has to continue beating, prayerfully all the way up until, right, you've done all that you needed to do here. It doesn't get a rest, and oftentimes I'll say to my clients, especially if they have, when they're in the midst of an argument and they're saying, they're complaining about their partner, saying their partner is not doing, this or that or enough or et cetera, right? And I'll say, well, imagine if your heart, said like, man, I just got to keep beating all the time, like the kidney better pull its weight, or the tonsils or whatever other areas in our body that clearly, right, is not doing what it does. But it doesn't do that, right? It does what it knows it is designed and purposed to do, because it knows that it has to continue doing that to be able for us to, right, live life healthily. And I think it's a great way to kind of look at the structure of our relationships, because, yeah, the heart is there and it's beating all the time, but the heart without the brain, right, it's not going to be great for our body. And each part, right, of our body, the internal mechanism, is valuable, but none of it is valuable detached from the fact that it is the purpose of the whole, right? The whole dynamics of the way our body works is that it is there to help to support our life, to be able to, right, sustain the life of an individual. It's that one purpose and harmony in that one vision. And I think in that same way, that's how we look at our relationships, right? Is that there is this interdependent system between a husband and a wife, between a man and a woman, that, we're not doing the same things because we're not the same, and we have to complement each other. And we know that as we move along and walk with each other, right, there is a collective purpose or a collective vision that is greater than what we can do individually. What I like to present to my clients is what it means to have an interdependent system of fairness in a relationship, that something being equal and something being fair is different. Even though we sometimes use those things interchangeably, it is different, right? When we're thinking about equal, at the bare bones definition of something being equal, it means that those two things are the same. And in a relationship, it's most definitely made up of two people who complement each other, right? What they both have to offer each other. They might not have the same strengths, and you want the difference between the masculine and the feminine energy to kind of join each other so that we can learn from each other, so that we can grow and kind of understand God as much as we can. I can't say we can understand God in totality because I don't think that'll happen in this lifetime, but at least we can strive to through understanding each other and how he made each for each other, and how to work with one another, even within the differences, and highlight, and celebrate those differences and grow interdependently with each other. So that's what we were talking about tonight. So thank you for all of you guys who popped in. There were so many people who came in. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Anyone who's watching on the many different platforms that I go live on, feel free, if you're on YouTube, to live, comment, and subscribe. You'll know whenever I come on, and you will be able to catch the latest and the complete episodes. I only put the full episodes on YouTube. So definitely subscribe to that if you want to dive in deeper with me, if you want to inquire about one-on-one coaching, or become a member of my Forever Friends Academy and join with a membership. Feel free to click the link on my description on YouTube, as well as Facebook. And on IG, click the link on the bio. So it was great talking to you guys.